Thank you very much. Harvey, I'm going to have my water instead of milk, sorry. But he's not even listening to me. I guess that makes sense. Well, I guess we've been sort of talking a little bit about the food guide all day, so I guess it's only appropriate that I have to stand up here and say something here. So there's lots I'm not going to do today. I am really going to just focus on the development of the healthy eating pattern. We have another talk. We have a number of other talks coming up over the next few days. Will and I are doing an update on Saturday, I guess, at noontime, where we'll go into other aspects of the healthy eating strategy, and I'll put a bit of emphasis there on the evidence base with respect to the healthy eating strategy, and talk about the food guide more in detail, sort of other aspects of the food guide. And I think, Will, you're going to be talking about the front of pack and the sodium, I think, are the main areas that we're going to look at. I know on Saturday as well, Sylvie, you're going to have the session that really looks about the analysis of the 2004-2015 Canadian Community Health Survey. Cynthia is doing a presentation on dietary pattern modeling, so our principal components analysis. So there's lots of other things going on. I don't want to repeat too much what we're doing, so I'm going to focus. And also, I think I only have 20 minutes, and I thought I had 35, so I'll apologize right off the bat that I'm going to go through some of these things pretty fast. And again, very quickly through the process into really focusing on the healthy eating pattern and how we go about developing the healthy eating pattern. I think I'll try and relate it to some of the comments that we've had throughout the day by the different speakers as well, and I think we're addressing a lot of the things that came up. You know, first of all, as I think most of you have heard me talk before, we are transforming really the way we bring out our dietary guidance. We are moving completely away from this all-in-one 6-pager that you sort of fold out and supposed to be everything for everybody, and really going towards developing different types of materials and guidance that are communicated to different audiences. So different audiences like health professionals, like policymakers, and also to Canadians, because as someone has mentioned here, you know, you need different types of information to go to different people. And so what we're trying to do is develop the whole range of the depth of the different information, but make sure that it's easy for people to access it at the level that they need. So as you see in that sort of round diagram, what I'll be talking about tomorrow is about the healthy eating policy, the 2018, and then the consumer tools a little bit in our new platform, concentrating right now on the healthy eating pattern. What is coming out in this particular year, in 2018, is the first bit that has to do with the policy on healthy eating, the general guidance, and again, next year it will be into the pattern that I'm about to describe. As always, I just wanted to reinforce, because sometimes there's a little bit of, let's say, stuff in the press about how we're not really following evidence and stuff, that all of this is based on a very thorough approach to looking at evidence that we have published, and we are updating that evidence as well, looking at what has come out since we published the evidence review. 2015 is the cutoff date on the evidence, but we will be putting out one that takes it right up to this year as well, when in the next few months as well. Eating pattern, Mary presented this already earlier in terms of what is an eating pattern, so I don't have to spend much time on that, but that's really what we're focusing on in putting together our healthy eating pattern. Mary as well presented what we've done in the past as an example, of course, of what a healthy eating pattern is, and this is from the 2007 food guide, so I won't spend much time on that. Of course, the quantities are in the middle, and on the right-hand side, it's sort of the quality sorts of statements about what happens. We, of course, published on that. Going very quickly again in here. So we've done that before, and I think we have a very good pattern already in the 2007. It's effectively the DASH diet. I mean, if you really examine what the DASH diet is, comes forward with our Canadian food guide, the 2007 is essentially the very same diet. It's just expressed in slightly different ways. But what we wanted to do as we went forward is, well, let's learn what else are other people doing? What's sort of the best practice that is out there besides drinking water? So there were a number of countries, the UK and Denmark and Brazil and the United Kingdom, the States and Ireland and Japan who have used modeling or statistical analysis approaches to really develop patterns, healthy eating patterns. And so we scanned through all of those, and we've actually that's been accepted now for publication. I think there's still a few little tweaks that have to happen, but that'll be ready to go out. But we looked at what were sort of the common elements of these modeling approaches, and there are, I guess, those particular 6 steps. And it's very similar to what we had done before with some modifications. You've got creating food groups, establishing the parameters, and by parameters, the age, sex groups that you have there, the nutrients considered, the number of calories, or if you want to bring those into place, develop representative foods, and that is what we tend to call food composites, and I'll give a little example of what that means earlier. But in that first stage of modeling, it's good if you have a composite for dark green vegetables, for example, or for fruit. That makes it a little bit easier in that first round of the modeling. And then using that, you get your draft pattern, and then you go back and evaluate the proposed pattern with individual foods, with real foods. Because after all, this is a food pattern here that we're talking about. As Harvey had mentioned, it's really important that this is not just seen as a nutrient pattern. This is a healthy eating pattern based on foods. And then we adjust as required. And you adjust, and you adjust, and you adjust, as you know, on this sort of an approach. So our approach is this. Basically, what we have with respect to our objectives is to really use the convincing associations that we have looked at in our evidence reviews between dietary patterns, between foods and nutrients, and the risk of nutrition-related chronic diseases and conditions. Once again, Harvey, you were pointing out the necessity to really be focusing on the chronic conditions as well. And it's important as well to stay within the calorie side of things. We were accused in the past pattern of not really being careful enough on that. And in the end, you want to make sure it's nutritionally adequate as well. So that's sort of what our objectives were. Of course, with this, there are all sorts of considerations that you have to bring into place. One has to do with flexibility and be relevant to Canadians, and this gets to some of the comments that Benoit has made here, is that you don't really want to have one strict pattern that everyone's supposed to eat exactly the same things all the time, but it has to be something that people can build into their everyday practice. So it has to be something that can be flexible and work for them. We want to make sure that, I can't remember who said this, but it's not just for the upper class sort of thing. You come out with a food guide where you don't have to worry about creating more inequity between populations, but you're actually dealing with that health equity issue. Oral health has come into it very strongly, and the cost. We've got the cost of foods in there as well. So, just a second. I see, no, that is right. My pages were mixed up here. So what we use here basically to get there, it's a mathematical optimization approach, a linear programming approach to get there, the 2 steps. And the first step is really getting that draft healthy eating pattern where we're using these representative foods, the composites, and once again, I think the next slide shows that. And then once you've gone through many rounds and sort of coming up with something that you think is a good draft pattern, then you use simulated diets to do the testing on that. So I'll explain that in a second too. So here is an example of the types of groupings we do. We don't just model with the 4 food groups, we'll say. We model, I think it's somewhere between 30 and 40 different food groups that we are doing, so we get down to a lower level. So vegetables, for instance, gets broken down into non-starchy and starchy, and then within that, there's a lower level where you're talking about dark green vegetables, yellow vegetables, other vegetables, and then in the starchy potatoes, starchy vegetables as well. So you've got those split out, so when you're doing your modeling, you can sort of keep track of those separately. The first step of the optimization, what we do here is we're bringing in what we call constraints or requirements. So the goal here is to incorporate convincing evidence on food, nutrients, and health. So what we are looking at here, of course, is we're using, once again, food-based constraints where we can make sure that the pattern includes or limits certain groupings of foods that have been associated with specific outcomes. So for instance, we know that there's convincing evidence around the patterns with the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet, and we look at the subgroups that are common across those patterns for which there is strong evidence. We are not saying eat the Mediterranean diet or eat the DASH diet. We're looking at the evidence that is consistent between those to bring into our modeling. Okay, I think that's sometimes misunderstood when we talk about the evidence of the Mediterranean diets. What we're doing is we're using that as evidence to then go forward and create something for Canada in our particular context. So, for instance, the food-based constraints that we're using here have to do having, from the patterning work, to have greater than the mean intake of fruit, of non-starchy vegetables, of fish and shellfish, of legumes, nuts and seeds, and unsaturated fats and oils. And Harvey, I would think of canola oil would be part of that as well. We also do, of course, set up some nutrient-based constraints, which would be along the lines of sodium and saturated fat and sugars, and nutrient-based constraints to make sure you're getting enough of things like calcium and iron, potassium and vitamin D. So it's a bit of a mix, but really the food is really at the core of that as well. The second part, what we call the objective function, that's the function in this type of a modeling that you really want to minimize. And people have used different sorts of things. They try to minimize energy, or they're trying to minimize cost. What we actually have decided to minimize has to do with really the difference between what people are eating now and the optimum diet. And we think that that's really essential, because what that does is it minimizes the risk that you develop an optimized diet that has unrealistic quantities of foods that people don't want to eat. Like, you don't want to come up with a modeling that comes up with, say, 17 servings of green leafy vegetables or something like that. So the idea is to try and set it in the context of what is available in Canada in terms of the food supply and what people are eating in Canada from that particular food supply, and then create an optimal diet, a healthy eating diet that is as close as possible, because then it really becomes easier to move people in that direction. They're using the foods that they're used to, but you then move them. And in that way, once again, it becomes more realistic. And as well, what it does is it helps for us to really figure out what are the changes that have to take place to help Canadians eat healthier. And as Mary talked about earlier, sometimes small changes take you down that path quite quickly as well. So the idea, again, is to come up with an optimal diet that is not unachievable at all, but really closer to what the consumption patterns are, and then help people to get to that in that particular direction. I'm not going to go through this, but of course we are keeping track of the energy requirements through models of that. Then we get to how do we deal with the considerations at the end. I mentioned a number of considerations that were there. I know there's a lot here, but so the first one is that we want to make sure that things are flexible, relevant, and that the health equity is looked at. So, and this was brought forward, combine groupings of food as much as possible, allow for more general, less prescriptive guidance, and several of our speakers talked about that as well. Benoit, once again, and Mary, you talk, there are many ways to have a healthy diet, so you have to consult you have to sort of prepare your healthy eating pattern and your guidance that makes it easier for people to realize that, to get the healthier diet. But it might be quite different, whether you're on the prairies, on the West Coast, or whether you're in Quebec. These can be different things. We want to test patterns. Isabel talked about this in terms of what consumers were looking for, and they're avoiding particular types of foods. This also came up in the Canadian Community Health Survey in 2015 as people identified foods that they were dropping, and I put them down there: fish, meat, or dairy. Now, just to be clear, they are there because that's what people identified. That's not me wanting to get rid of these foods. Just sometimes I get misinterpreted on that particular thing. But the idea is that if people are going to be dropping those, then you can do your modeling, pulling those out and seeing what are the nutritional ramifications of dropping those sorts of things. And so if people are dropping them, then what do they have to do to compensate for that sort of thing? Or should they perhaps not be dropping them, as Harvey might point out for certain things as well. So that's sort of that. I mean, the other thing that does, of course, if you're removing certain things, that you can deal with, to a certain degree, different cultural and personal preferences as well in this modeling process. Let's see. who else is in here? Relevance, cost of foods, health equity. These are things, of course, that Catherine Chan brought up with her particular model that had to do with having adequate, available, accessible, and accessible and acceptable. I'm trying to think of the 4 A's that were there. So I think in here, I really like the 4 A's. I'm going to start modifying my sorts of stuff to talk about it in that particular way. But it's that sort of an approach to make sure that you're coming up with a pattern that makes sense for a number of reasons. The second step, of course, is once you've got that initial draft pattern that you've used with composites. I don't think I did show the slide about I don't know where it disappeared to. Anyway, I might find it sometime. Then what you do is, you've got that pattern, and then what you do is we go through, you use simulated diets. And here what we do is we go back and use real foods that, again, drawn from CCHS 2015 with respect to what people are eating. You do 500 simulated diets for each particular age, sex category, and you go through the rounds of the simulation and you evaluate, whether or not you're getting close to what that optimal diet is. We evaluate in a number of ways. I won't go through this one in much, but the evaluation here, these are you evaluate with respect to nutrients that have DRIs, of course, and you evaluate it with nutrients that don't have DRIs, but sort of saturated fat-free sugar. So that's sort of the basis of how we get to a healthy eating pattern. I think that we are actually addressing a lot of the concerns that came up from our speakers this morning in the methodology that we have put together to do this. And then, of course, the different way of looking at things, again, as Mary talked about quite clearly this morning, is to do a dietary pattern analysis. And here, this is really what this allows us to do, and I think it's really described better in this next one, is it allows us to describe which foods are eaten together in the Canadian population. Because in the first run, we're not really looking at the linkage up of, well, you eat this particular food and you also eat this food together. The other ones, they're all kind of separate. But this really has great potential, I think, to strengthen our food pattern modeling that we've been doing by looking at the relationships between different types of foods and what pops up through the principal components analysis. What else? I think that's sort of the description of our methodology. I'm just a little bit over time so far. Okay, good. This one, these are going to be all available, so I'll just leave this, but this is just a description of what we have changed between what we did in 2007 and now. We will, of course, be always with openness and transparency, and we actually want to publish these sorts of things too. We will continue to publish documents and make it really clear. Communicating the pattern, this will be hopefully in about a year's time or so. We'll be able to put out this particular piece, Canada's Healthy Eating Pattern for Health Professionals and Policymakers, and I hope a very thorough, Sylvia, it's going to be quite a thorough report, right? Yes, there we go, good. Guidance on amounts and types of food as well as life stage diets. And then when we take it into then messaging and resources for Canadians, and then at that particular stage, we'll bring in the whole life stage into what goes out to consumers as well. Through this modeling, we will also look at the need or not for vitamin mineral supplementation recommendations, like what we did before with vitamin D in 2007. So I think what we've really done here is that we have put together, and by we, of course, it has nothing to do with me, it's that table down there that really did all this, and is put together a very rigorous evidence-based approach to putting together a healthy eating pattern. It complements what will be coming out in this year and maybe into the fall, the dietary guidelines for health professionals, the general guidance, builds on our international scan. It is based on the convincing findings in the evidence review for dietary guidance, which once again brings in those relationships between foods and nutrients and patterns and chronic disease and health. It is in the Canadian context because we are using the newest consumption data that comes out of CCHS 2015. And we've had lots of good help from scientists around the world on this. Just an overview sort of on how these things are going to roll out. As I say, the first dietary guidance policy report to be later in 2018, at the same time coming out with tools and resources for Canadians. And then in a year's time, this healthy eating pattern should be coming out, and there will be associated enhancements to the tools and resources for Canadians at that point. Now, this is where my guys wonder, what the heck where did that come from? And when I was doing that's what I was supposed to present, but it struck me that when you were talking this morning, you brought up what are the things that you'd actually like to have in ideal guidance for Canadians. And these top 10 things, so information on the general healthy eating patterns to adopt, well, I think I've demonstrated that that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to use the best evidence to come up with a healthy eating pattern that will be easy to adopt. And I think because of the objective function that we've chosen to really try and make it as close as possible what people are eating and make it easier for people to adopt, we're trying to do that. Available on multiple platforms. One aspect of what we are doing, of course, is we're creating a brand new mobile-friendly, web-based environment because people don't use paper anymore to get their advice. What we're trying to do is have a cloud-based, we're developing a whole cloud-based resource where you should be able to access it wherever you are using whatever type of a device you have, and most of the materials will actually be created for, well, this isn't a phone, well, it looks like one, but anyway, for your phone as well, your mobile phone. Guidance on healthy eating outside of the home. We are looking at different settings. We've got lots of different work already partway there in terms of when you are in that particular setting. If we're in a grocery store or you're out in a restaurant eating, you should be able to just pop into on your phone and get the advice in that particular setting as well. Tips for developing food skills. Of course, 1/4 of the dietary guidelines, Canada's dietary guidelines, is about food skills. That's an area that we're really thrusting, and we're developing lots of material for that as well. Cost, socioeconomic components. We have actually brought in costing, using Stats Canada's costing numbers to try and build that in somewhat to our modeling, or at least to be able to do a post hoc analysis of what's going on, of what we're proposing as we move forward with the pattern. Adaptable. What we're trying to do, of course, we're working with a number of different stakeholders, whether it is different health professional groups like Dietitians of Canada, Canadian Medical Association, the Ordre Professionnel des Diététistes du Québec, or the family practitioners, and we've been working with them all along and trying to develop the policy that will be applicable to them, so then it can be adopted by them to use with their patient groups or whoever they have to interact with as well. And recipes, yeah, we do actually have a bunch of recipes that are in creation right now as well. So it was kind of fun when I saw Jim present this morning. I thought, well, yeah, check. We're at least trying to do these sorts of things. So I hope you won't have to wait for 5, 10, or 20 years to see all 10 of these. I think we'll have all of these probably within about a year or so. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Benoit, come on, Benoit. You've asked everybody else a question. I'd be hurt if you didn't ask me something.
I'm going to get a reputation, I guess. Thank you very much. This is very interesting, and I feel exciting. I look forward to seeing the results of all this modeling. I was just curious, maybe it's a too technical question, but when you talked about the modeling and then see how the different patterns were correlated with socioeconomic, aspects or risk factors or characteristics of population. I was wondering if there was an attempt to integrate these variables into defining the patterns, because obviously this creates different perspective when you look at patterns according to socioeconomic status, for example, or other characteristics.
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, the straight cost, and that's why we have actually, at least from that particular aspect, the straight cost, we have gotten lots of databases from working with Stats Canada, and we are trying to do that analysis of, Sylvie, help me a little bit here. What we're using is we've got a certain percentage of the foods we've got cost, the costing thing. Sorry, it's always fun when you, unannounced, you ask someone to specify this, but we're bringing in costing into the into the modeling.
For the costing of the food, you
For the
mean?
costing, yeah.
Well, we work with StatScan to be able to have like a certain portion of the foods that are going to be used to develop the composite or the representative food,
Really?
and we'll have an estimate of how much of that composite could cost. It's not for costing of the pattern. We have to be clear here because we don't have all the foods that are going to be part of it, but it gives a sense for us to be able to decrease the overall cost of the pattern, or we'll see how it's going to move when we're making changes in those proportion of the different food groups.
Yeah. But you always have to be aware that if you just go by cost, then you lose sort of the
we have to balance between
the balance
cost and
of
the
sort of
health
what is there that's
benefits, for
available,
sure.
right? So it is sort of a bit of a trade-off on that way. You still want to make sure that there are lots of foods there so that people can see themselves in the foods that we're proposing. So it is a bit of a trade-off, but we are doing that. The second thing that we, of course, do with respect to costing, and this is the true costing, is that following this, then we will be looking at the nutritious food basket, which is the costing tool that's used by all provinces and territories, and we actually use it in some of our national surveys as well. That's something that's developed in my office as well, but the true costing tool. But that'll be developed subsequent to this. Thank you, Sylvie.
This is just a quick question, because it seemed to stand out to me. After relevance, you had oral health and reduced sugar. Like, why does oral health fall out? Why not cardiovascular and metabolic health? Or help me understand that.
Yeah, so I think that has to do with the consideration where the things like cardiovascular are built right into the constraints that we put into the model. We haven't built in the constraints the same way with oral health, but that's, we're working a lot with the Canadian Dental Association and the dental hygienists, and what we're trying to do is to make sure that we are not putting out dietary guidance that would also affect your production of cavities as well. Harvey finally came.
Do I get the last question? Sorry to put on my farmer's hat, but you know, the issue of health makes wealth and wealth makes health.
Yeah.
Actually, you answered the question for me, and I just want to say thank you. That's the economic consideration. I mean, Benoit's kind of raised that from a Quebec standpoint, and you know, I've been out in Alberta, you know, in March, and just about got my head cut off because of perceptions of what you're going to do to different commodities and so on. I think your point that, you know, this is also where you're going with the food guide is in a sense economically responsible. Of course, changes will have to happen, will happen, but it's not a guillotine.
No.
That's been kind of amazing in the agricultural community that there was a feeling that there's going to be a guillotine somewhere. Yes. And so I think I can answer the question now, so thank you.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, it's well, yeah, I'm tempted, it's a misunderstanding, but it's actually perhaps we were not clear enough with what we said going out, so it was misunderstood perhaps of where we were going. So certainly we have, through the consultation, there has, you know, we've had 2 rounds of consultation, over 20,000 people in the first round, 6,700 people in the second round. We've gotten lots of comments back, and we've made lots of adjustments based on certainly the clarity of what the guidance was supposed to mean. We've learned a lot from what has come in and the input for the consultations.
Hi, thanks so much. I might have missed this because you're going pretty quick. But with the patterning that you're coming up with, if you come into, say, any unintended consequences, you know, I don't know what those might be, but maybe say, oh, geez, you know, we switched this pattern around and we don't have enough vitamin B12,
right,
or we don't
right,
have
right.
enough calcium.
Right.
Will you use that patterning then to go back and reinform or readjust those health guidelines for health professionals if you see something that's like, oh my gosh, you know, we really missed that, and you've done your research, so maybe you won't, but I'm just wondering if that's in the plan.
I mean, I certainly what I would see is that in the second release of policy, I guess, you know, the first release of policy is more general recommendations, and the second are more of the specifics, and I would assume that most things we would report on in the second report in a year's time.
Okay.
That goes out to health professionals. Like,
Okay.
Certainly, I mean, if you're thinking in the lines of, you know, do we need to go into supplementation or to to talk with our colleagues, our regulatory colleagues about other things that should be done. Of course, we'll do that in-house as well. But I would hope that because we have based so strongly the guidelines that will be coming out this year on very strong, convincing evidence from the evidence review, we don't think that there will be changes there. But of course, if that's what comes up, if there are changes, we will go back and fix that as well.
Right, and so I heard you correctly, we are delayed a little bit, because originally the guidelines were going to be, for health professionals, were coming out in the spring, right? So we're looking into fall now, is that correct?
Did I say that out
Yeah,
loud?
I think you did. I was at the Dietitians of Canada conference last year.
I guess
Sure.
I did, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Hi, Hassan. Thanks. It's nice to see that there's some rigor to your process, which is good to see. I mean, one of the things we do when we teach the food guide is, and this has been brought up by Benoit, is, there's not necessarily anything wrong with the content of the food guide. If you adhere to it, you do quite well. You match the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, et cetera. Problem is nobody follows the food guide.
Yep.
And so the question is how you get people to get there. And, patterns is one approach, and, hopefully that'll work. But, it's going to take a long time before we get, people in Quebec to eat legumes, or, people in Newfoundland eat anything green. And so, some of the issue really is, do you think that aligning it with Ag Canada or what's locally grown could be the nudge? And I'm just wondering if, you have room in the guidance or the patterns to say, this is what's locally grown. People like to support the local farmers and their local farmers markets. It's as simple as, nudging them towards that, as opposed to, bringing in foods that they don't normally eat.
Yeah. We don't really address that aspect. I mean, what we are I must say that there is a side of me that is really very cognizant of food insecurity in Canada, and I think when you look at your sources of vegetables and fruit, fresh is great, but I also think that different sorts of processing can be great as well, whether it's frozen or canning appropriately without the addition of sodium or sugars and stuff like that. Those are great sources, and in the end, what I'm trying to make sure is that our guidance is very relevant to health of Canadians, and I don't want to create any barriers. I mean, again, I like going to my farmer's market, but I don't know if that's the type of advice that I should be giving for the general population of Canada, when so much of the population of Canada doesn't have access to that, and at times it's more expensive as well. So.
We'll keep the presidential train rolling.
Are you going to go there because you're coming up, or what? Yeah, you'll ask the last question.
Yeah,
I can see it already.
As president,
I think our time's up, though, isn't it, David?
Actually, my time's not
Depends
up yet.
on your question.
I have a couple more days in my role as president. But I just a similar question to Rob, but just a slightly different perspective. In the systematic review of dietary patterns in other jurisdictions, kind of along the lines of nudge, is there evidence that dietary patterns affect behavior change? I think that's what Rob was trying to get at. We generate a lot of knowledge. We tell people to eat well, move more, but people don't necessarily do as they're told. So does the evidence support behavior change?
Yeah.
And we had some evidence that maybe genetics, as David Much talked about this morning, may lead to behavior change in the longer term. Is there strong evidence for this?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, you're right. In terms of the behavior change, that's always the hard thing to look at. And when I see some of the analysis that's being done of the food guide and people not following it, so no matter how good your food guide is, if you can't actually convince people to get across there. But I think part of the problem for that is because of all the conflicting nutrition information that we are having out here. You just have to listen. Does anyone listen to radio anymore? Listen to your podcast, or see what comes across in the news, and there is so much conflicting information, and that's why we actually took a very focused approach to working in collaboration with large numbers of different people here, and in the sense that we worked with different health professional groups all the way along. We worked with different health promotion groups. We worked with the provinces and territories. We've had monthly meetings for almost 3 years with the provinces and territories, because us putting out a food guide, the federal government, Me Health Canada, is not going to magically change everything. You have to make sure that there's that consistency of message that's reinforcing it, whether you're getting that from the provincial government, the territorial government, the municipal government, your health unit, whether you're getting it from Dietitians of Canada or your doctor, or, you know, it's that alignment of what's going forward that has become really important. So that's been a very integral part of what we've done as we've been creating these. And then we hope that's a very integral part to what happens when then you implement it and things roll out, that it's not just Health Canada rolling this out, that it's provinces and territories and dietitians and doctors and you know, heart and stroke and diabetes rolling it out. It's getting that consistency of message across the health communities as much as possible. That, I think, is what's going to make a difference.
I think we'll draw the questions to a close. Thank you very much.
I have one more.